Oh, hi. Welcome to University Bookshop. I'm going to be assisting you today with your shopping for the rest of the term, or perhaps the year. Are you sure you've made a pre-order for all the books that you need this term? Great. What I'm going to need is your student card, so I can check it off against the list to make sure you're not nicking anybody else's books. Right, great. Sorry, I don't even know what I was looking at there. I trust you. Okay, so I've got a massive stack of books here. Good luck. I mean, of course, you chose to study English, so you must love literature and philosophy. Well, if you love philosophy so much, you just study philosophy, but, literature and its associated things, particularly criticism, because there's lots of criticism going on with the books that you're studying. I'm just going to push that back there so you can actually see, give myself a bit more room to manoeuvre. So the first book you needed is Paradise Lost by John Milton. Is that correct? Great. Now, you must have heard of this. It is probably one of the greatest classics of English literature of, well, the past, now, forever, I imagine. It is an attempt by John Milton to give more depth to the Genesis story of the Bible. That is the story by which the world and Adam and Eve were created, well, allegedly created, depending on your own theological beliefs. And a lot of that actually comes into play when you're studying Paradise Lost, which is what makes it so interesting, I think. I mean, you're going to have some great debates in class. Really, really fun. So, Paradise Lost was written a long time ago, I believe. I'm just going to check to see whether I'm not being fooled. Yeah, I knew it's the 17th century, but I don't want to give you wrong information. I mean, I should probably know. I work in the University Bookshop, and this also is a really good edition. Now, Paradise Lost is split into a number of books. Again, I'm going to check to see how many there are, because I don't want to lead you astray, because I think once I alleged there were 15 books, and there are certainly not. No, 12 books. 12 books, all mixed in. Oh, that's satisfying. I love paper books. I don't really approve of Kindles and things. Much prefer paper books. This is the Penguin Classics edition. It's really, you just ignore the scantily clad lady on the front. I think you'll really enjoy it. It is actually used, this one, to, obviously you're more budget minded than I was when I first started uni. I applaud that. I need that now. I wish I'd known right at the start. But it's really, really excellent. And then, of course, the only way to accompany the original Paradise Lost is the Common Guide to Paradise Lost. And this is kind of your all-purpose cheat sheet about, well, the book itself. It's really great. This certainly helps you understand a lot more of the complicated parts of Paradise Lost, particularly Satan. Because Satan, we're told, is really, really evil. Like, he is the epitome of what is bad in the world. But Milton's a bit more open to praising Satan. At the start, he is pictured as a heroic revolutionary. And by sort of book 9, when he's been through a lot of transformations, he's depicted more as the victim of oppression by God. And I thought that was really, really interesting to debate, particularly in essays. So, I'm giving you a bit of a head start here when you end up in your lectures, and your professor will stand at the front and say, who knows about Satan in Paradise Lost? And of course, you'll know. You can come and thank me later. So yeah, because Satan starts off in a blaze of fire and glory, and he's got his huge army, yet by the end he has to enter the Garden of Eden. He's first of all rejected. He gets caught by an angel and thrown out, and he has to sort of creep in. He actually comes in via a mist. Again, a little bit of knowledge for you. He has to come in this kind of mist and creep in incognito, in rises and falls, at the foot of paradise as well. So this is very far gone from a man, or well, he's not really a man, a creation that was once God's favourite angel, who is now forced to sort of creep in to the garden that was once his. And then he has to disguise himself as a serpent, quite famously, in order to deceive Eve into tasting the fruit. And again, discussions of Eve are fascinating, particularly if you're interested in feminism in literature. So if you know a lot about that, then you're going to find Paradise Lost amazing. You'll really, really enjoy it. I mean, I can't even stress how good it is. It's really worth a read, and I'm so jealous you get to go through it again. Oh, the other thing that it really explains well, in a nice and simple manner, is the conflict between Arminianism and Calvinism. So Milton was a Protestant first of all, because he lived in the 17th century in England, so pretty much everybody was a Protestant, but he subscribed to an idea called Arminianism. And Arminianism is the notion that God gave people free will, so they are responsible for their actions. Whereas the dominant idea in Protestant theology at the time was something called Calvinism. So it's the teaching of Armin versus the teachings of Calvin. And Calvinism was really severe. It's the idea that everything is predetermined. You don't have the power to change the course of your life. God has a plan, and that plan it's impossible to deviate from that plan. And I think Satan is quite generous. Milton is quite generous to Satan in order to attack Arminianism. Because it was the poet Blake who once said that Milton was of the devil's party without knowing it. I think that's beautifully phrased, but also really interesting, because Milton was such a strong Christian, yet such a strong Arminian, that he made Satan perhaps more of a tragic hero in order to make sort of Adam and Eve's fall more plausible. I'm sorry, I've really deviated from Arminianism versus Calvinism, but this is how easy it is to discuss Paradise Lost. It's brilliant. I loved writing my exam paper on it. It was absolutely fascinating. But anyway, enough about Paradise Lost, because I can see another excellent text at the top. God, I've gone wild today. At the top of this lovely pile. It's the next one. That's a nice breeze. Oh, I might do that again. Oh, marvellous. It's so hot outside. I mean, here's me in a jumper, but air conditioning is broken. This is King Lear. Now, the play in its first folio was originally titled A True History of King Lear. Now, Lear was real. Well, believed to be real. I mean, I don't know how reliable medieval history is. Not even medieval, it's sort of really quite ancient English history. But anyway, Lear was a man. Lear in this case spelled L-E-I-R, whereas in the Shakespeare version it's L-E-A-R. Lear's daughters in the real story are Cordelia instead of Cordelia, in King Lear by Shakespeare. And also Regan, the same name, and Goneril instead of Goneril. I don't know why Shakespeare changed the names. He was very cheeky, actually, because there was a play about this real King Lear that was out about 2 years before this King Lear came out. How sneaky is that? But I kind of admire Shakespeare for it. I mean, in fact, all of his plays drew substantially on influences from other things, and he makes King Lear very dark. Very, very dark. Almost hopeless. Again, that's a clue for what you're going to be discussing when you eventually delve into, wait for it, The Common Guide to King Lear. Another life-saving book. Now, King Lear was written, or at least first performed, in 1606. And it was performed only periodically, maybe 5 or 6 times, before it was deemed just too sad, too bleak to be performed again. And Lear was actually rewritten by a guy called Nahum Tate, who, instead of having, I won't spoil the ending, but it's really, really bleak. There's lots of death, people are dropping like flies. It's almost like an episode of CSI Miami. And Nahum Tate decided that it should end with a wedding. Because, of course, all good plays end with a wedding, right? All good tragedies end with a wedding. I mean, sorry, that's a literature joke. But anyway, King Lear is quite a fascinating work. One which has baffled critics for some time. And the critics have changed their opinions ever since it's been written. So in the 17th and most of the 18th century, you had the Christian strand of criticism, which considered Lear to be far, far, far too bleak. These critics thought that Shakespeare killed people who didn't deserve to be killed. These critics thought that Shakespeare had an unrealistically upsetting storyline, but that this upset didn't really serve a purpose. And then the romantic critics of the 19th century, famous people such as Byron or Shelley, could see more value in that sort of evil that you see within King Lear. I mean, I really don't want to spoil it for you. It's an absolutely gripping text. It's really good to see played, at the theatre, but it's notoriously difficult. Actually, I would recommend reading it first. It's the most book-like of Shakespeare's works. Do you see what I mean? And I read it in one sitting. Now, this copy is a second-hand one, as you can tell, because it has a sticker which says "Great" on it. I mean, I'm sure you'll be great. I don't think I ever got one of those stickers. Yeah, King Lear was hard for me. And then the strand of criticism to which I subscribe the most is the absurdist strand, characterised by people such as Jan Kott in the 1900s, or the 20th century, depending on, what you're going to call it. And Kott was very set on the idea that Lear was so mad. The whole play was so mad and so bleak and so destructive that it represented all of the destruction and madness that had occurred in the world in the years from 1914 to 1945. Jan Kott was alive during the Holocaust, whereas during the 17th and 18th centuries, life was easy for the English academic, which probably explains the differing forms of criticism, which links nicely onto, I'm sorry for not going chronologically, which links nicely onto the romantic strand of criticism, which I deliberately left hanging, which is the idea that Lear is really, really quite bleak. Sorry, King Lear. You end up referring to it as Lear, it's confusing. You have Lear the king, and then Lear the play, Lear the original king, Lear the original play, and all the further adaptations henceforth. But the Romantics thought that it was a form of emotional exercise. If you're at the gym, you're exercising your muscles in order to make them stronger. They thought that watching a play of Lear was so emotionally difficult that it would make you more robust, or at least more able to understand emotions. And you really do see a roller coaster. This is 3 or 4 plays rolled into one. You could easily have just the story of Lear, but then there's a side story, there's a backstory, there's a subplot. There's this brilliant subplot that permeates the whole thing. I almost prefer the subplot to the original plot, the main plot. I'm sorry, I'm just on the verge of spoiling it for you. I've got to hold myself back. And then finally, a bit of criticism for Lear is 1606 by James Shapiro. Such a satisfying sound. I'm just gonna give myself a bit of breeze again. That's nice. And 1606 by James Shapiro is probably one of the greatest works of literary history and criticism of the 21st century. James Shapiro is probably the most respected scholar on Shakespeare at this time, and he, in maybe 50 years' time, will be talking about him in the same way as I'm talking about Jan Kott, or for the Romantics, G. Wilson Knight, or A.C. Bradley, and Samuel Johnson for the Christian critics of the 17th and 18th century. So he is going to be 21st century criticism of King Lear, and he's really exploring a lot of ideas, particularly, the history surrounding Lear, which is something which has never really been properly explained or explored before. And he makes an attempt at a modern form of criticism, something which has come to the fore really in the late 20th and, the whole of the 21st century, which is eco-criticism, which is the way that the environment impacts upon the way that a book is written. So it's not as reductive as saying, it was a shitty winter, so Shakespeare wanted to kill everybody in his play. That's not really how it works. Rather, it's ideas of Shakespeare's mood, of his reaction to changing political circumstances, and that's the really important one, because remember, in 1603, the Jacobean regime superseded the Tudor regime in England. So Elizabeth I died, and she'd been a great figurehead, the symbol of the nation. She's the heart of the lion lady. And then King James VI of Scotland, who liked to hunt and fish and ride horses, but who was also a really strong and intelligent religious scholar, came down and became James I of England, so beginning the union of the crowns in 1603 between England and Scotland. And this kind of regime change, the dangers of it, the dangers of rebellion, because of course what happened in 1605? The Gunpowder Plot. And there's a lot of plotting in Lear, and it's very unclear what Shakespeare thinks about revolutions and plotting and people changing their circumstances through their wits, because of course with the decline of the feudal system, where knights who'd had power since 1066, when William the Conqueror came across from Normandy and took over England, the decline of that system led to a new system where people became wealthy and influential based on what they could offer, a lot more like modern capitalism, rather than what their parents, grandparents and great-grandparents had inherited from somebody way up the line. And so Lear is really quite fascinating in that respect. Really, really worth reading. And I've just given you a little bit of information, but it should set you in good stead for being ready to move on. Now, enough of English literature. Actually, no, the final two in this pile are English. But enough of old English literature. On to some good, modern, American books. Stop saying literature, it sounds pretentious. These are all the books you wanted, right? I don't want to be giving you the wrong pile, and I'm pretty sure I've got the right name tag on it. Yeah, great. Now, probably the most seminal classic of American literature, regularly ranked as the best book ever written, is F. Scott Fitzgerald's The Great Gatsby. And every single book that you're going to study for the American literature segment of your degree is going to be about the American dream. The most permeating literary theme, I think, ever. And The Great Gatsby is probably the classic novel about the American dream. Because Gatsby is an enigmatic man who has clearly risen out of nothing to become hugely wealthy, but also to lack emotional fulfillment. And there's also a lot about the people who haven't succeeded in obtaining the American dream, which is why the people on the dust heap outside New York, where Nick Carraway and his friend, the wealthy Yale alumnus who is married to Tom Buchanan, who represents the upper class of America, the people who are inheriting their wealth rather than making themselves in Gatsby fashion, i.e. the antithesis of the American dream. There's a lot about the dust heap representing the people who haven't quite made it, who haven't had the guts or the brains or the opportunities to make it big in the new America. And the next play, is Arthur Miller, famous for marrying Marilyn Monroe and writing The Crucible. It's Death of a Salesman. The salesman, Willie Loman, has tried his entire life to do well for his family. He's well liked. He's a pillar of the community, and he's still working into his old age, and he's got no security. They're trying to make payments on their fridge, on their car, on their house. They are the victims of American capitalism, and thereby the victims of the American dream. Miller is trying to prove that even if you work hard, it's not necessarily possible to attain the American dream, because there are people cutting in line before you, people with privilege, people who understand the new technologies that are coming out. And the most electrifying scene, I think, of this play is one that you'll soon read or see performed, where Willie's boss is demonstrating to him a new voice recorder, and it terrifies him. The new world terrifies him. America, the way it has changed, terrifies Willie. And he encourages his children to do the same, to be liked, to be handsome. And it doesn't work for them either. Because, of course, Miller's message is that that Willie rode on a smile and a shoe shine. Beyond that, when he wasn't chipper, when times were hard, he couldn't sell anything. And he kids himself that he does, but he doesn't. His wife sits and darns socks, because that's all they can afford to do. It's actually quite emotional. Sorry, I sort of descended into an emotional flurry. I'm sure he'll enjoy it. Now, making links between the American dream and Faulkner is a little bit more difficult, because Faulkner himself came from a wealthy southern family. From Mississippi. Faulkner was well-to-do. So he instead implicitly talks about the American dream by painting a picture of southern life. The Sound and the Fury. I knew it, but I didn't want to get it wrong, because I'm trying to be all dramatic in introducing you to probably some of the best texts ever written. I need to make sure I get it right. So, The Sound and the Fury concerns the Compson family and all of the members of that family, kind of the way that their lives are affected by legacy, by social convention, by family fighting. And probably the best scene in this is, the best part of this is the part which is written with no punctuation. There's a whole segment. It's so interesting the way he does it, because James Joyce, who wrote Ulysses, does this as well. He depicts not stupidity, but sort of slowness, lack of academic strength, which is something I'm sure you don't suffer from, judging by the books that you've chosen, through a lack of punctuation. Something which is, again, not seen directly in Death of a Salesman, but sort of a lack of academic achievement does indeed permeate that book. So there are entire chapters which are written with no capital letters, barely any spaces, incorrect spellings. I think Faulkner's a genius, and I believe he won the Nobel Prize for this specific work and a number of others, but he definitely won the Nobel Prize. Next is the quite excellent On the Road by Jack Kerouac. And Kerouac is probably one of the greatest geniuses that I've ever encountered. I was about to say I've ever met, but unfortunately our lives passed each other by. Although I think you really do meet him when you read On the Road. He spent many years travelling across America, seeing the devastation of the Dust Bowl, which is also written about by authors such as Steinbeck, particularly in The Grapes of Wrath, and I'm very surprised not to see that amongst this, but the one at the bottom is a real classic. I mean, absolute genius. And Kerouac, he spent many years travelling on buses, making a living here and there. Really clever man, went to an Ivy League college, and he spent a number of weeks writing it. You can actually go and see the original manuscript. It's all sort of glued together, a massive typed ream of thought, not just of writing, but of thought. And many journalists would ask him, Jack, why didn't you just go on the road for a number of weeks and then spend 5 or 6 years writing it, i.e. the other way around to what he did? And of course his simple response would be that you couldn't write what he'd written without truly feeling poverty, truly feeling loss and depression, lack of meaning. And thus, I think you're really going to enjoy it. Again, I can't really talk any more about it without spoiling it, but I think you're really going to enjoy. Furthermore, Ginsberg, a collection of his poetry. Now, my personal favourite is Howl, and I mean, the thing you've got to know about Allen Ginsberg is he was not right in the head when he was writing this. He was on a lot of drugs. Again, a genius, and a great founder, along with Kerouac, of the beat writing movement. Ginsberg wanted to capture a new method of writing. He wanted to capture a new method of thinking outside of the sort of reserved and formulaic manner that has become prevalent, especially in the United States, in their education system, as you can see in movies such as The Dead Poets Society with Robin Williams, rest in peace. And Ginsberg writes this crazy, crazy poem. I mean, it's just electrifying. Again, it's just such a nightmare. I wish you'd come here and you were buying the books again, so I could just explain to you what I thought. It's amazing. You're really going to enjoy it. Sorry, I'm really conscious of time because I think, you've got to be getting on. Are you enjoying yourself? Good, because there's a lot to say about this one. Jean Rhys, Wide Sargasso Sea. Now, Jean Rhys was a proper genius. A genius of quite grand proportions, actually, who wrote about this madwoman from the attic, from the classic English novel Jane Eyre by Charlotte Bronte. Who is tortured by her husband, not physically tortured, but emotionally tortured, which is hence why it's an excellent feminist work, which spurred probably the greatest work of feminist criticism ever, which is actually out of stock, unfortunately, at the moment, which is The Madwoman at the Attic. Sorry, The Madwoman in the Attic by Gilbert and Gubar. I think it's Susan Gilbert and Sandra Gubar. You can always refer to them as Gilbert and Gubar, it's easy, but this is a beautiful cross between discussions of the place of women in society, particularly in colonial society, and discussions of race as well, or perhaps instead of saying race, ethnic background. The way that the Creoles of the islands in the Caribbean reacted to the domination of their land by whites, the way that their folklore and their unique perspective on the world sort of mixes in with the bleakness of the English mindset, and how men, when given free rein, would abuse their women. Of course, very difficult to recognise when you're a man. But there we go. Indeed, when you go out on campus, you'll find they've got these brilliant stalls where if you can go up to these stalls where you can get a free slap for being a white, cisgendered, straight identifying man. Unfortunately, that described me quite well. But anyway, Wide Sargasso Sea, and I think it's definitely worth ordering. We've got them coming in, but you might want to order it yourself. Amazon's quicker. I work for a bookshop. I don't run the place, but I work for it, and even I sometimes guiltily use Amazon because it's so cheap and so quick. Goes really well with this. The Feminine Gospels by Caroline Duffy, who is currently the Poet Laureate of the United Kingdom, meaning that she is employed by the government to write poetry on behalf of the government and the royal family. Now, I'm going to spoil one of the poems for you. All of the other ones are free for you to explore. There are really great comparisons with all works of feminist literature because, of course, Caroline Duffy is herself a doyenne of feminist text writing. I need to stop saying literature. I can't overuse the word literature. One of my favourites is Beautiful, which is 4 little vignettes about 4 amazing women. I'm only spoil the last one for you because you can read the other ones and you'll be able to tell who they are. They're quite amazing, really. But one is about Marilyn Monroe, and probably one of my favourite lines of 21st century poetry would be this. I'm going to read you about half a stanza, 2/3 of a stanza. It's because it ends with "Happy birthday, Mr. President," and I definitely can't sing you that. It starts, "Dumb beauty. She slept in an eye mask, naked, drugged, till the maid came, sponged at her puffy face, painted the beauty on in beige, pinks, blues. Then it was coffee, pills, booze, Frank on the record player. It was put on the mink, get in the studio car. Somebody big was watching her, white fur, mouth up to the mic, under the lights." I'm not going to sing it for you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, Mr. President. The audience drooled. I don't know if you've ever seen the movie about Marilyn Monroe, A Day with Marilyn, where there's this electrifying scene where she says to her maid and her stylist, "Shall I be her?" What Carol Ann Duffy is trying to convey is that Marilyn Monroe was so ravaged by the drug she took to feel as if she was worth something, her voice gone so hoarse from all the cigarettes that she smoked, that she was no longer the persona of Marilyn Monroe. She had to be put back together like a painting, restored every morning. And I felt sorry for her. She had all the wealth she could possibly have, all the followers, all the friends, but she wasn't real. And that's quite heartbreaking. I'm sorry, I'm going to cry. And that concludes our tour of the first semester of English literature. Well, literature in general, I suppose. It's just called English literature to be old-fashioned. There's quite a lot of American in there. So, would you like a bag? I'm sorry, you're looking even more shocked than I am. It was intense. You wouldn't like a bag. Okay, you brought one with you. Great. Just pick up your pile. Have you got all of those? Great, sorry, I still got your student card. Here you go. Well, thank you very much for your custom. Please come back to me if you have any problems, and I hope you really enjoy the course. I'll see you around the faculty, right? You know, big. Unfortunately, all the scientists have got new buildings, whereas we that a lot study arts are in some ugly 60s concrete building. You must have seen it, right? Yeah, that's where we're going to be spending 3 years, maybe 4. Avoid the masters. Alright, great, I'll see you around. Just say hi whenever, honestly, we'll go for a coffee. Okay, thank you very much.